The mid-Atlantic will see 30s and 40s, 70s in the forecast for the southern half of Florida, 70s and 80s across Texas, 60s and 70s for Southern California, 30s and 40s for most of the rest of the West. Day watch continues, or rather daybreak, but right now here's the Thursday forecast for some selected cities around the country.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
The Philippine government says Ferdinand Marcos was planning to fly from Honolulu back to the Philippines on this 707, parked at Honolulu's International Airport. The plane said to be leased by a Lebanese arms dealer. Marcos reportedly shelved any travel plans after a visit from a representative of the State Department.
This is Daybreak for Thursday, January 29th, with Reid Collins in Washington and Brian Nelson and Molly McCoy in Atlanta.
Good morning. A rebellion against the policies of President Aquino has collapsed in Manila. Amid reports, the former President Marcos and his wife Imelda were planning a return to the Philippines. The last rebels holding out in a television station on the edge of Manila gave up and were hustled aboard buses bound for Army headquarters. They insisted this was not really an attempted coup, but a protest to what they've seen as leniency on the part of the Aquino government. They quit without bloodshed, and after some long negotiations that involved the chief of the armed forces himself, General Ramos. Ferdinand Marcos says the U.S. government ordered him last night not to leave Hawaii for the Philippines and left him feeling like a prisoner in Honolulu. The rebel activity back in Manila had fueled rumors Marcos was planning a comeback. More speculation when that chartered Boeing appeared out at the Honolulu airport. Marcos said he wanted to go home because, quote, my country is in a crisis. But he said the United States would prevent him from boarding any plane bound for the Philippines. In Manila, the Aquino government said Marcos' plan to fly home on the 707 had been aborted, partly through the work of the Philippine Consul General in Hawaii, Tomas Gomez.
We were able to establish this because of the frenzy being created in Manila. Every time Mr. Marcos disappears, they say that he is returning and things like this. It's creating a lot of problems there. The bottom line, of course, is I believe Marcos cannot and will not leave for a variety of reasons. His health won't allow him, and the realities back home will be too dangerous for him to do that. However, on the basis of this information, we started acting, piecing things together, and every now and then when he disappears, we are able to manage bringing him out, ferreting him, for him to surface. We are able to establish that, in fact, he did not leave.
The owner of a military clothing store in Honolulu says Imelda Marcos was in there on Monday buying $2,000 worth of jungle boots, camouflage items, belts, and other items. The owner says Mrs. Marcos was buying for persons in various sizes, and she rushed through the store in some 20 minutes. The manager says she paid for her purchases with a sheaf of $100 bills. Workers on the strike-bound Long Island Railroad are obeying a federal order, going back to the job this morning. Congress and the President intervened in that 10-day-old walkout, imposing a 60-day cooling-off period and ordering the federal mediators then to recommend a contract. The strike has forced more than 100,000 New York commuters to find other ways to get to and from work. But just because the workers are back doesn't mean the trains are. The railroad's president, Bruce McIver, says 700 miles of track still have to be plowed.
Big thing that we have to do is snow removal, obviously. We also have to get our trains and engines running again and then move them into position so that they'll be able to provide service. We have to check the switches, the crossing gates, the signaling system, things like that. There's plenty to do, but we think that in a couple of days we can do it.
McIver says the ticket windows will be staffed probably by Saturday and the train should roll on Monday morning.
It's 4 minutes past the hour now. The federal government is stepping in to cut down on flight delays at airports nationwide. Major airlines will get antitrust immunity, permitting them to meet with each other to adjust flight schedules to avoid delays. Transportation Secretary Elizabeth Dole also said yesterday that an investigation will begin. 13 airports with the biggest number of flight delays will be included in that probe. The government wants to know if some airlines deliberately plan more flights than airports can handle.
The Senate Intelligence Committee could make public a report on the Iran arms deal today. Much of the report was leaked to the media earlier, but from a version written under Republican control. It has been rewritten now that the Democrats head the committee, and committee members promise no startling revelations, but they say the report will be a record of what is known so far. There has been word about 4 teachers, 3 of them American, kidnapped in Lebanon last Saturday. Photographs of Robert Polhill and Indian Mittaleshwar Singh arrived at newspaper and wire service offices in Beirut. A note from a group calling itself the Islamic Holy War for the Liberation of Palestine claims that organization kidnapped the men. The 4-page note, which accompanied the photos, did not include the men's. A group called the Organization for the Oppressed of the World previously had claimed responsibility, but did not back it up with snapshots.
A report from England's Archbishop of Canterbury says there is word that hostage negotiator Terry Waite is safe. Waite dropped out of sight 9 days ago in Lebanon for talks with Islamic Jihad and hasn't been heard from since. But Drew's leaders say he is okay and continuing his mission somewhere in Lebanon. The British Embassy is trying to get independent confirmation of that. The State Department has moved to keep Americans out of Lebanon. That country is now off limits to holders of American passports. The estimated 1,500 Americans in Lebanon have 30 days to get out. Violators could face a hefty fine and even a jail term. The administration admits the U.S. cannot protect Americans in Lebanon.
Some thick fog triggered pileups on a southern interstate highway yesterday, killing 4 people in Texas and another 4 in Louisiana. The 24-vehicle wreck in southeast Texas happened about 9 in the morning on Interstate 10, about 50 miles east of Houston. 4 members of a Texas family were killed, and 6 other people were injured in that collision. A fiery chain reaction crash caused havoc yesterday morning in southeast Louisiana. 27 cars collided on a fog-covered Interstate 10 bridge. 4 people were burned to death when their car caught fire. It is now 6:30 past the hour. Time for a look at this nation's weather today. And here's Valerie Voss. Good morning, Valerie.
Good morning, Brian. Thank you. Once again, it is foggy across the Gulf Coast states. Right now, travel advisories in effect only for the Florida Panhandle, where visibilities are quite low. But if you are traveling in fog, of course, slow down, drive carefully. By later on.
Take a peek at the Caloretics home video on Take 2 at noon Eastern on CNN.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Ferdinand Marcos says the State Department has prevented his return to the Philippines, and now he feels like a prisoner in Hawaii. The ousted president says he wants to go back because the Philippines is in crisis. But the Aquino government says the crisis is finished, and so is Marcos.
This is Daybreak for Thursday, January 29th, with Reid Collins in Washington and Bob Cain and Marianne Loughlin in Atlanta.
Good morning. A mini uprising against the policies of President Aquino collapsed in Manila with the surrender of the last holdouts at an occupied broadcast station, and former President Marcos was told to stay put in Honolulu, cancel any plans for a return. The mutinous troops, led by a dissident colonel, left the station grounds without bloodshed, boarded buses for the Army headquarters. The colonel says it wasn't really a coup attempt anyway, just a protest. The Aquino government says it has aborted a plan by Marcos to fly to the Philippines from Hawaii. And Marcos himself said last night the U.S. government did order him not to board any planes for home. Speculation centers on a chartered Boeing 707 standing by at the Honolulu airport. But when asked if he planned to use it to go back to the Philippines, Marcos said all that is immaterial. The Philippine government did some checking on this mysterious plane and found it's owned by a Miami outfit called Pan Aviation, but is leased to a Lebanese arms dealer.
I'm not sure if in fact they filed a flight plan, but mention of Saipan and Hong Kong were mentioned as a possible destination. There was even no evidence that Marcos even went near the aircraft.
Marcos told reporters he got a visit yesterday from 2 State Department officials who warned that he would be physically prevented from getting on that plane. He said nonetheless he'll do all he can to get back, and he encouraged the Philippine rebels to keep fighting on. Imelda Marcos turned up Monday at a military clothing store in Honolulu and dropped $2,000 on a bundle of clothing, boots, and other items. Douglas Boyer of the military shop of Hawaii says Mrs. Marcos and her entourage, about 8 other people, rushed through the store in about 20 minutes.
There was some camouflage pants, some jungle boots, some desert boots, T-shirts, some jackets. Naturally, we wouldn't want to think that we were aiding a rebellion anyplace. But again, it is possible.
Boyer says Mrs. Marcos paid for the purchases with a sheaf of 20 $100 bills. Well, more than 6,000 workers are returning to their jobs this morning at the nation's largest commuter railroad. Management and labor predict the Long Island Railroad should be in full operation by Monday. The 10-day labor dispute entered a 60-day negotiate while working period when emergency legislation was signed by President Reagan. Workers have begun the process of plowing the snow from the tracks and bringing the operations up to speed and thawing out the switches. Some limited service should resume Saturday. Frustrated air travelers long have claimed the airlines misrepresent their schedules and plan more flights from some airports than they actually can handle. The Transportation Secretary, Elizabeth Dole, says those charges now will be investigated during a study of the nation's 13 most congested airports. With flight delays last year increasing by more than 70,000, Dole proposes a limited antitrust exemption be given the airlines so they can coordinate schedules and talk to one another.
Now nearly 4 minutes past the hour. A settlement may be near in a dispute over grain sales between the U.S. and Europe that threatened to turn into the worst trade war in more than 2 decades. The U.S. has warned it would impose steep tariffs on some European products unless U.S. exporters were compensated for grain sales they lost when Spain raised its import duties. The Common Markets leadership has just come up with a 4-year agreement giving the U.S. special access to Spain's grain markets. The 12 member countries will meet later this morning to discuss that proposal.
The Senate Intelligence Committee may release its report on the Iran-Contra affair today. The committee's investigation has been described as the most detailed yet. The panel is expected to adopt a final report when it meets this afternoon and then send it on to the Senate Select Committee, which meets later today. The Reagan administration wants this report made public.
My understanding is that once the president appoints the special prosecutor, once we give full cooperation to these committees, then what we've been instructed to do is let the committees get the reports out. And that's why we wanted to see limited use, immunity granted, get the facts to the American people. That's why we want to see the Senate report come out, and I understand it will. That's why we fully cooperated with the various investigation.
Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman David Boren says he hopes the final report can be given to the Select Senate Committee today or tomorrow. Sources close to the committee say the way has been cleared now to release the report to the public.
The British Embassy in Beirut is trying to confirm reports that hostage negotiator Terry Waite is safe. The Church of England says it has been assured that Waite is okay and is continuing his talks to free Westerners held hostage in Lebanon. Waite has not been seen since leaving his Beirut hotel 9 days ago. It's believed he went to meet with Shiite Muslim extremists who claim to hold 2 Americans hostage. Meantime, the Reagan administration is declaring Lebanon off limits to U.S. citizens because of the danger they may be kidnapped. Americans already in Lebanon have 30 days to leave before their U.S. passports become invalid. The administration warns that those who try to use their passports after that deadline may be sent to prison for up to 5 years and fined $2,000. News media in Beirut have received pictures of 2 of 4 teachers kidnapped from Beirut University College last week. The pictures of Robert Polhill and Minileshwar Singh come with a statement from a group called the Islamic Jihad for the Liberation of Palestine. That previously unknown group claims it abducted the 4 teachers, 3 Americans and a U.S. resident from India. The group says the men were kidnapped because they, quote, carried out American conspiracies while disguised as teachers.
The Senate and the House are considering legislation to cut off aid to Nicaragua's Contra rebels. The bills would block the remaining $40 million of the $100 million Contra aid package, which Congress approved last year. Senator Christopher Dodd argued yesterday for the aid cutoff at a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing.
Our support for the Contras is the foreign policy version of the EDSL. We can continue to pump more dollars into the program. We can continue to tinker with the trim and the taillights. We can fiddle with the hood ornaments. We can restyle the grill. But after we have done all of that, after we've had endless meetings, endless discussions, and endless debates, The reality is we've still got an Edsel.
A former commander of the U.S. military forces in Central America testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee yesterday. Retired Army General Paul Gorman called the Contras fight to overthrow the leftist government of Nicaragua futile. It is now 7.5 minutes past the hour. This is Daybreak for Thursday morning, and Valerie Voss joins us for a preview of our weather. Valerie.
Good morning, Bob. Thank you. Yesterday,
When there's something special, people know it.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
This is Day Watch for Thursday, January 29th, with Reid Collins in Washington, Bob Cain and Marianne Loughlin in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. An Imelda Marcos shopping spree for combat boots and camouflage clothes and a chartered jet parked at the Honolulu airport. Both strong clues as to what is now believed to have been an attempt by the ousted Philippine President Marcos to return home from exile. It's an attempt that Marcos himself now admits was blocked by U.S. officials. CNN's Molly McCoy has more.
Deposed Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos said U.S. officials made it clear.
I will be prevented from boarding any plane that would take me to the Philippines.
Marcos has often expressed his desire to return to his homeland, where he was ousted from office last year. Speculation had mounted that he might try to leave soon after an attempted coup by Marcos supporters. Rumors surfaced that this plane might return Marcos to his homeland. A Boeing 707 arrived at the Honolulu airport from Miami, but no flight plan had been filed. A Philippine official told CNN the plane is owned by Pan Aviation of Miami and leased by a Lebanese arms dealer. The official did not believe there were direct ties between Marcos and the dealer, Sarkis Saganalian. He's currently under indictment in the U.S. on illegal arms charges. Marcos told reporters he wants to return to the Philippines as soon as possible.
My country is in crisis.
He said he feels like a prisoner.
Under these conditions, how do you expect me to live?
On Monday, Imelda Marcos bought about $2,000 worth of military clothing and gear from a Hawaii store.
There was some camouflage pants, some jungle boots, some desert boots, T-shirts, some jackets.
The store owner says Mrs. Marcos and her group spent about 20 minutes in the store buying all sizes of clothes. She did not say who the clothing was for, however. Wednesday night, guards at the Marcos home were wearing camouflage outfits instead of regular street clothes. Molly McCoy, CNN.
In the Philippines, the second attempt at the 11-month-old government of Aquino finally has ended. The last holdouts of the uprising surrendered at a television station just on the edge of Manila. They left peaceably and were bused to the Army's headquarters in Manila. Rebels deny, though, they were Marcos supporters and say they took action in opposition to the Aquino attempts to negotiate with communists and that they oppose the upcoming vote on the new Philippine Constitution. A 4-day Islamic summit has ended now in Kuwait with the call for Iran and Iraq to end that 6.5-year-long war. The 46-nation Organization of Islamic Conference also denounced the United States raid on Libya, demanding compensation be paid for the damage. The final session also called on the Soviets to withdraw from Afghanistan and reiterate support for an independent Palestinian homeland. A new warning from a terrorist group in Lebanon today. The Islamic Jihad for the Liberation of Palestine claims to hold 3 American hostages and an Indian national in Beirut. This group issued a statement today warning the United States if there's any attack against them, then they'll kill their hostages at the first sign. The statement, delivered to an international news agency, also included a photograph of one of the hostages, the American professor Robert Pohill. Sources in Bonn are saying that a government envoy now is in Tehran to appeal to authorities for aid in winning release of the 2 West Germans being held hostage in Beirut. Meanwhile, the Developed newspaper reports authorities in West Germany do believe the 2 Hamadi brothers they now have in jail are terrorists and who were plotting to attack targets in Europe. The evidence, a cache of liquid explosive found yesterday in the western state of Saarland, not far from one of the Hamadi brothers' homes. Mohammed Hamadi was arrested in the middle of January at the airport at Frankfurt. Allegedly, he took part in the June 85 TWA hijacking. His brother, Ali, was arrested this past Monday at the same airport. Well, Terry Waite is safe and well. Those, at least, the latest assurances given the Church of England by the Druze leadership in Lebanon. Waite has not been seen in Beirut in more than a week now, having gone underground for his negotiations to free some hostages. There have been growing fears and reports, too, Waite himself has become a hostage. Yesterday, the Archbishop of Canterbury said in a written statement he'd been given new assurances his envoy is well and continuing his discussions.
U.S. officials say Libya may be plotting to help a Shiite Muslim group launch new terrorist attacks against the United States. CNN Foreign Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter has details from the State Department.
American intelligence sources have picked up recent indications that Libya's Muammar Gaddafi is trying to establish contact with one of the key Lebanese terrorist groups believed to be holding American hostages. U.S. counterterrorism officials believe Libya is trying to enlist the Hezbollah group in a broader terrorist campaign against the United States. One U.S. official says that would be very unsettling because an alliance with Libya could provide the Hezbollah Shiites with money, techniques, and other resources to expand their anti-American terrorism. U.S. officials also believe there is a direct connection between Hezbollah and at least 3 Hamadi brothers involved in the 1985 hijacking of a TWA plane in Lebanon. The United States is requesting the extradition of Mohammed Ali Hamadi from West Germany in connection with the hijacking. One of his brothers, Ali Abbas Hamadi, was arrested in Germany this week after authorities intercepted phone conversations linking him to the taking of hostages in Lebanon. A third brother, Abdel Hadi Hamadi, is known to U.S. officials as the security director for Hezbollah in Lebanon. A senior White House official says the small Hezbollah group of which the Hamadis are members may be responsible for all of the most recent Beirut kidnappings.
Says the people in Beirut, a chaotic place right now, seek to intimidate civilization.
U.S. officials say the noose around terrorists is being tightened, even by European governments previously reluctant to crack down. A French court has decided to try a Lebanese suspect accused of killing an American military attaché and an Israeli diplomat in 1982 in Paris. Freeing the suspect and preventing his prosecution was the apparent goal of a series of bombings in Paris last fall.
American officials consider the French and German decisions to prosecute accused terrorists important steps toward persuading them that they will be caught and will be forced to pay for their crimes. Ralph Begleiter, CNN at the State Department.
7 minutes past the hour. It looks as if
This is Day Watch for Thursday, January 29th, with Reid Collins in Washington, Bob Cain and Marianne Loughlin in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. The group that claims to hold 4 professors from Beirut University College is warning now those hostages will be killed if the United States attacks Lebanon. The statement may show concern for a growing concentration of U.S. naval power in the Mediterranean. The Navy has 2 carrier fleets stationed there, and a third one's due next week, perhaps to monitor the Iran-Iraq war. Today, Secretary of State George Shultz said this new group that holds the teachers, 3 of whom are Americans, has ties to numerous other terrorist organizations, and they in turn have a very strong connection, he said, with Iran. The French news agency, and only the French news agency, is reporting that a European woman has been kidnapped in Beirut today. She would become the first female victim in the current rash of hostage-taking, but this report, as we say, has not been confirmed elsewhere. The deposed Philippine President Marcos says U.S. officials have blocked him from returning to his country. Speculation he planned to leave soon intensified with discovery of a charter plane parked out of the Honolulu airport, rumored to be headed for the Philippines. This coupled with that mini rebellion against President Aquino's government back in Manila. Marcos held a news conference at his Hawaiian home last night, and CNN's Molly McCoy has more.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
attempted coup in the Philippines comes to an end with the surrender of 200 rebels who had been holed up in a TV station since Tuesday. And Ferdinand Marcos levels charges against the U.S., saying he still wants to return to his country. Welcome to Newsday. I'm Bella Shaw.
And I'm Don Miller. We'll have details of those stories coming right up. But first, there was an all-too-familiar delivery made to a Western news agency in Beirut today. A note, handwritten in Arabic, threatening the lives of Western hostages. It was from a group called Islamic Jihad for the Liberation of Palestine, and arrived with a picture of Robert Polhill, one of 4 professors kidnapped from Beirut University College last weekend. He was shown with 2 guns pointing at his head. The threat coincides with a Pentagon decision to leave 2 aircraft carriers and a Navy battle group in the Mediterranean indefinitely.
British envoy Terry Waite's close relatives are worried about him. His cousin says it's not like him not to call, even while on a mission to negotiate the release of foreign hostages.
He has not been in contact, and that's cause for concern. And I know that he will be aware of all the fuss that there is going on. He'll want to do something to allay the fears of people, and the fact that he isn't means that he's being prevented from doing that.
Last night, the Church of England issued a statement saying it had been assured Waite was safe. It said those assurances came from leaders of the Druze community who have been acting as Waite's bodyguards in Lebanon.
The State Department has ordered all Americans out of Lebanon within 30 days, except for embassy personnel. Today, an American teacher named Robert Voss arrived in Cyprus from Beirut. He was the last American man on staff at the American Community School. And with his departure, it's believed there are only 3 Americans left in Beirut who don't have real U.S. Lebanese citizenship. Voss says the kidnapping last weekend of 4 Beirut University professors was the last straw for him. He says he figured he could be next.
A West German official is in Iran to talk to authorities.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Now a full 60 minutes of foreign news and perspective. This is the CNN International Hour.
The relatives of hostage negotiator Terry Waite say they'll breathe easier when the Anglican church envoy resurfaces. This, security sources and witnesses in Lebanon say Terry Waite has been spotted in the Syrian-controlled Bekaa Valley. And Philippine President Corazon Aquino says the attempted coup was aimed at disrupting the first principle of democracy as she calls for approval of her proposed constitution. Good afternoon and welcome to the International Hour. In Washington, I'm Bernard Shaw.
And at CNN headquarters in Atlanta, I'm Donna Kelley.
And I'm Ralph Wenge. The kidnappers of 3 Americans and an Indian professor are threatening to kill their hostages. Today, a group calling itself the Islamic Jihad for the Liberation of Palestine released a photograph of hostage Robert Polhill with 2 guns pointed at his head. An accompanying letter said the hostages will be executed if the United States and its allies carry out a military strike in Lebanon. The United States has dispatched at least 2 aircraft carrier groups to the region, a move Pentagon sources say is related to the hostage situation. Polhill and 3 others were seized on Saturday. They are all employees of the Beirut University College.
At least 11 foreigners have been taken captive in Lebanon during the past 2 weeks, including 2 West Germans. Now, today, a West German envoy traveled to Iran. There are reports that he was carrying a personal message from West Germany's foreign minister asking for help in winning the release of those 2 hostages. Now, the West German government has confirmed that the envoy is in Tehran, but will not say whether he is there to discuss the hostage situation. Rudolf Cordes and Alfred Schmidt were seized just after West German authorities arrested a suspected Lebanese terrorist in Frankfurt.
Meanwhile, there's new word today about hostage negotiator Terry Waite, who's been missing in Lebanon for more than a week now. The French press agency says Waite was seen today in Syrian-controlled eastern Lebanon, traveling in his convoy near Baalbek. The agency quotes security sources who say Waite is likely to reappear in Beirut within 48 hours. They say his negotiations with Muslim kidnappers have been dragging, especially over just which hostages might be let go. It was thought for a while that Waite was talking with the extremists holding Americans Terry Anderson and Thomas Sutherland. Another report from a Lebanese news agency says Waite was seen with some hostages today. We don't know which ones. Waite dropped out of sight 9 days ago. Yesterday, the Church of England said it had learned that Wade is safe, but that did not satisfy Wade's wife, Frances.
Yes, well, I have been quite worried about him, actually. But I always thought somehow that nothing would happen to him. And he would come back. I always thought that.
Some reports, never confirmed, have said that Wade might have become the hostage himself.
The Senate Intelligence Committee may release its final report today on the investigation into the Iran-Contra affair. Informed sources tell CNN the new version of the report, which was reviewed today, differs from the old version in one key respect. A memorandum found in the White House safe of fired NSC staffer Oliver North is considered key to whether President Reagan knew about the reported diversion of funds to the Contras. The sources are telling CNN the old report stated the committee found, quote, no significant evidence the president knew of the reported diversion. The new report, which has just been approved, is expected not to draw any conclusions. The White House today confirmed President Reagan signed a Bible which was delivered to high-ranking Iranian officials during U.S. dealings with Tehran. This after the Iranian parliamentary speaker held up a copy of the Bible at a news conference yesterday. White House spokesman Larry Speaks says the president signed the Bible October 3rd of last year at the request of then National Security Advisor John Poindexter. The White House says it believes the idea for the Bible was originated by North because Muslim and Christian values had been discussed in previous talks. Iran says it is now ready for its final blow against the Iraqi city of Basra. Iran has been trying to push towards the city for almost 3 weeks. Today, it shelled several Iraqi towns along the way, and Iraq says 2 people were killed, 8 wounded. Don Murray was taken to the front by Iranian authorities. His report has been cleared by Iranian censors.
The bodies of Iraqi soldiers still lie in the trenches where they were overrun. Beside them, their boots and the Koran. The Iranians say 3,000 enemy soldiers remain unburied. 3,000 of 15,000 they say they killed. This is the area the Iranians call Karbala 5, an area of flat marshland next to the Shat al-Arab River. On the other side of the river is Basra, Iraq's second city. The Iranians began their offensive on January 9th. Within a week, they had penetrated several kilometers into Iraq. And within a week, they had overrun 5 Iraqi defense lines, killing men and collecting armor. 550 tanks, 400 big guns, 5 helicopters, all destroyed. The fighting was brutal. This is the village of Douadji, now bombed and shelled into desolation. They call these Iranian fighters the Basij, the volunteers. They come armed with faith and little else. Their training, the Iranians themselves admit, is minimal. That it was they who attacked at Karbala 5, not units of the regular army. And it was they who pushed the advance forward at enormous cost. 20,000 dead, foreign diplomats suggest. The key, the Iranians say, was surprise. Karbala 5 was the second major attack on the Iraqi line in 12 days. Surprise coupled with massive artillery bombardment and Iraqi indiscipline. The Iranians claim 45% of the Iraqi brigades at Karbala are now non-existent, many of them melting when their soldiers deserted. The Iranian volunteers are digging in themselves now. But this is still the front line. Everywhere we went in Karbala, we were accompanied by the sound of shells, Iraqi shells. Because across the river, the giant petrochemical plant in the suburbs of Basra is still in Iraqi hands, and it remains a forbidding military citadel, bristling with armor. This was a ferocious, bloody battle, but Basra, the key Iraqi city, is still 12 kilometers down the road. The stalemate may be broken, but the end is still not yet in sight. Don Murray, inside Iran-occupied Iraq.
Despite hopes that some late maneuvering might lead to progress, the Islamic summit in Kuwait has ended without any hope for a quick settlement of the Iran-Iraq war. CNN's Ben McNitt reports from Kuwait.
The Islamic summit ended, a failure in bringing the Iran-Iraq war any closer to an end, a success in bringing together some of the quarreling and estranged Arab leaders. For 4 days, princes and presidents from 44 Muslim nations deplored killing in the Gulf War, fighting in Lebanon, conflict in Afghanistan. Jordan's King Hussein asked the summit to call for a ceasefire between Iran and Iraq, but with Iran absent, Iraq represented by a functionary, and loyalties within the summit split split between the warring nations, even the king's modest proposal failed. The summit did agree to condemn both the United States' attack on Libya last year and, without naming the Soviet Union, for an incursion into Afghanistan. Between sessions, King Hussein met the PLO's Yasser Arafat, a sign of some healing after a year of distrust and bitterness between the two. In Arab eyes, if Hussein and Arafat fail to bridge their differences, there is no hope to resolve the conflict with Israel. Syrian President Assad led condemnations of Israel, a nation, he said, with violence in its heart and expansion as its aim. But he withheld a threatened assault on Egypt for coming to terms with Israel. Outside the conference hall, Egypt's President Mubarak approached Assad, they shook hands and entered the session hand in hand. Diplomats say the two later met privately, an encounter officially denied by both sides. Egypt and Syria remain apart, moderation opposed to militancy, but the level of mutual invective may lessen. A meeting with Saudi King Fahd was a major stride by Mubarak in ending Egypt's estrangement from the Arab world. Arab diplomatic ties remain severed over Egypt's peace with Israel, but Cairo's readmission to the Arab League now heads the agenda if that organization musters the consensus to convene once again. Conference leaders, particularly the Arabs, are pleased over openings to bridge internal conflicts. The handshakes and personal contacts may bear fruit, but to do so, policy differences which remain will also have to be overcome. Ben McNitt, CNN, Kuwait.
Israeli soldiers clashed with Palestinian protesters on the occupied West Bank today, and reports say Arab demonstrators tried to storm a town hall. The Israelis say their forces shot one protester in the chest after he bolted from custody. Palestinian sources say 3 protesters were wounded in all. The protest was set off by Israel's deportation of a suspected PLO youth leader in Jordan.
In the Philippines, President Corazon Aquino says she will punish all those involved in the recent coup attempt. She says the military rebels will be court-martialed and their civilian counterparts will be charged with rebellion. CNN's Brian Jenkins has a review of events that led to the rebel surrender.
After 54 hours, it seemed to all be over but the shouting. Leaders of the rebel force had met with the Philippines' top brass at the Ministry of Defense and announced that they would vacate the television complex they had occupied since Tuesday. But a funny thing happened on the way back to the station. The Air Force colonel who had led the takeover reportedly disappeared en route, and the 100 to 200 rebel soldiers still inside the station refused to leave. 12 hours earlier, government troops had tried to gas the renegades out, but when the morning surrender fizzled out, the rebels were allowed to sit tight. The Marcos loyalists who came to cheer on the rebels were smoked out of the area at midday. Finally, in the late afternoon, 62 hours after they first arrived, the rebels emptied their guns and came out to be bused to a nearby military camp. The surrender came shortly after reports started hitting Manila that deposed President Ferdinand Marcos had been caught planning to board a chartered 707 in Honolulu and fly back to the Philippines. The press spokesman for President Aquino said it was the Philippine Consul General in Honolulu who put the kibosh on Marcos' travel plans, apparently with help from the U.S. State Department. Vice President Salvador Laurel was pleased with the Americans' assistance and amused by reports that Imelda Marcos had gone on a shopping spree this week.
They found out that she was shopping for combat boots and fatigue uniforms for I don't know how many, but she spent about $2,000 to $4,000.
Even with Marcos out of the picture, Mrs. Aquino knows that he and other extremists on both the right and the left will still be working behind the scenes to spoil the overwhelming vote of confidence she hopes to win next Monday in a nationwide vote on a new constitution. Brian Jenkins, CNN, Manila.
A little bit later in the International Hour, we'll have a report on the transformation of Cory Aquino from housewife and mother of 5 to the leader of the Philippines.
And we have this late note for you. The chairman and vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Oklahoma's Democratic Senator David Boren and Maine Republican William Cohen, will hold a press conference sometime after 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time today to talk about their final report on the Iran-Contra affair. CNN will bring you that news conference live when it happens, and as we reported about 4 or 5 minutes ago, CNN has learned the report may be released today. The Philippine government says it has put down an attempted coup which it charges was backed by ousted President Marcos. President Corazon Aquino went on television today saying the attempted coup was an effort to block approval of her proposed constitution. Aquino says she has ordered the military rebels who took over that broadcast station for 61 hours to be court-martialed. A government spokesman says Marcos's unauthorized plan to return to his homeland aboard a special chartered plane, this plane, was blocked by the Philippine consul in Honolulu, and State Department representatives visited Marcos in Hawaii to remind him he is not allowed to return to the Philippines unless granted permission by that government.
A third employee of the DuPont Plaza Hotel has been arrested in connection with the New Year's Eve fire there. 96 people died in the fire. Sources at the Puerto Rican Justice Department say that the man arrested today belongs to the Teamsters Union, as do 2 other suspects already in custody. The union was involved in a labor dispute with hotel managers at the time of the fire. Officials say the latest suspect will face arson, murder, and conspiracy charges.
And just ahead of the CNN International Hour, more official response from the Soviets on President Reagan's State of the Union address. And we'll be hearing the views of one expert who says the president's attitude toward the Soviets isn't in keeping with their recent shifts in policy.
Now back to the International Hour on CNN.
The Soviets are still complaining about the president's State of the Union address. A Soviet Foreign Ministry spokesman commented today. Gennady Gerasimov says that Mr. Reagan wrongly blamed Moscow for the failure to reach arms agreements at the Iceland summit. Gerasimov says Mr. Reagan's support of the Star Wars project is the real reason the summit collapsed, and the spokesman accused the president of addressing East-West relations with anti-Sovietism and an attitude of confrontation.
Joining us now on the CNN International Hour to add another perspective to relations between the United States and the Soviet Union is Michael MccGwire, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He has just written a book called Military Objectives in Soviet Foreign Policy. First of all, Mr. MccGwire, the story that Donna Kelley just reported from the Soviet Union, that Mr. Reagan wrongly blamed Moscow for the failure to reach arms agreements at the Iceland summit, that the real reason that the summit collapsed was Mr. Reagan's insistence on Star Wars. Do you agree?
Yes, the Star Wars is definitely a blocking point, and the Soviets feel very strongly about Star Wars. It's a new proposal we introduced in '83, and it has changed the game completely.
Now, I believe it's your contention that the United States failed to recognize a shift in the Soviet Union's military strategy and thereby missed some pretty important opportunities. Is that right?
Yes, it's a shift in doctrine about the nature of a world war, and from that is a change in objectives and consequently a change in strategy. This change was generally favorable, although the manifestations like the build-up of forces were very difficult to see. The trouble is that we were using outdated doctrine to interpret the evidence of what they were doing, and consequently we drew the wrong conclusions.
Well, why were they expecting a world war?
Well, both sides prepare for world war, the contingency of world war. I mean, it's a thing that both sides have been doing since about 1946-47.
But was there anything especially happening in 1966 that would make them a little bit more concerned than any other time?
No, rather the other way around. In fact, in 1966 they reevaluated that a war would not necessarily be nuclear and would not necessarily involve massive strikes on Russia. In fact, they had a less cataclysmic appreciation of the situation in '66.
So then this must have altered their military planning, did it not?
No, what it did was they had to change the nature of their operations in the event of a war. I mean, both sides prepare for the contingency of a world war, and that's largely what determines the structure of your forces. So they had to restructure their forces. Now, on the ground air forces in Europe, that was very worrying because it required an increase in conventional forces. But on the strategic side, the missile programs and the ABM, it in fact required cutbacks. But we didn't really appreciate these cutbacks. We saw them, but we misinterpreted them.
We've been hearing more and more about arms control from the Soviet Union ever since Mr. Gorbachev took power than we have in a good many years. The United States has been especially wary of the things that have been coming and that it's been hearing from the Soviet Union. Why?
Well, in fact, Soviet arms control policy changed in the late 60s. What you've seen with Mr. Gorbachev is a change in style and a change in flexibility. But you haven't seen a change in the general principles. If you read the memoir literature of American officials, you will see they all talk about how the Soviets were pushing for arms control. Secretary of State Haig, for example, makes the point that as soon as Reagan came in, Dobrynin was sort of knocking at his door saying, let's get on with arms control. On the whole, the people who dragged their feet on arms control is us.
Which brings us to the number one question that everybody seems to be asking these days. Can we trust Mr. Gorbachev?
It's not a question of trusting Mr. Gorbachev. It's a question of whether or not we can verify agreements and things like that. On the whole, the Soviet record in arms control is not at all bad. They have in fact cut back on programs. They've had to cut back on programs to meet the limits. We have not had to do that. Both SALT I and SALT II allowed us to go ahead with our plans, didn't materially affect us, whereas for the Russians, in both cases, they had to take major cuts.
Now, both sides have talked about verification. Are these the types of plans that would be effective? Can we trust the Soviets in verification?
Yes, verification. You're not trying for an absolute 100% something which they cannot slip the tiniest thing through. That's one point. I mean, what you're trying is for a level of certainty. And the other question in verification is that both sides have pushed the letter of the law as far as they can, and both sides have complained about the other.
All right, let's go to the question of SDI. Why is it the Soviets are so afraid of it?
Well, we see SDI as a technological opportunity. It's a rather exciting thing. The president has this particular dream about being able to put a completely defense-proof umbrella up there, which very few members of the administration believe. And most people see it as a way of enhancing deterrence and also getting us into space and getting an edge on the Russians. And there's a strong body of opinion in this country that sees it as allowing us to have superiority, in fact. From the Soviet point of view, they believe very strongly in our technological capability. They think that when we apply our mind to something, we can do it. But either we can't get there completely, as they expect us to strike first. Even a second-rate SDI would be effective, perhaps, in absorbing their retaliatory attack after they have already been subjected to an attack. Now, from that point of view, it is undermining their deterrent. But it's not only in those circumstances. They also see SDI as something that's going to make war much more likely. From their point of view, can they afford to sit around and watch us assemble Tinker Toys in the sky without having to do something about it before we finally end up with a complete system?
Are they not also very concerned, though, sir, about the fact that they respect our military complex, they respect our nuclear complex?